Welcome to the tutorial Advanced Painting. In this tutorial, I'm going to go over seeming mishmash of ideas whose common thread will be that they all are about painting. So the first feature I'd like to show you is how to discover what swatch a color in the drawing or camera view belongs to in the color view. So for example here, most of these colors are all very different, so it might be obvious that this is the only gradient that has pink in it, so you might be like, well, clearly that's the tongue, clearly this is a pattern, but you might run into a time where you have a lot of colors that are very similar, that are off tones, like these two yellows. So which one is which? Well, if you pick the eyedropper tool, you can either get it from the Tools toolbar or use the keyboard shortcut Alt or Option I. You can bring up the eyedropper, and once again, if you have another tool selected, such as the Paint tool, and you just want to bring it up momentarily, you can just hold down the I button and that will also work. So if I select the yellow here, we can see that this first leg on the right side is actually the skin swatch, whereas the leg on the left is the skin outline. So that's a fast way of figuring that out. Another way of doing it is actually selecting a swatch in the color view and then going to the top menu and selecting Drawing, select Strokes with Current Color. So when you do that, you'll see that all the strokes that are painted here with the outline color have been highlighted in orange. So we can deselect that. And it also works for patterns, so you can do the same thing, Drawing, select Stroke with Current Color, and then you see just the robe is selected because it's filled with this Japanese print pattern. The next thing I'd like to talk to you about is a linked color swatch feature, and this is very specific to all Toon Boom products. So in most paint programs, if there's an area that's been painted that you would like to then change, you always have to go into the color palette, select a different swatch, and repaint it. And this is the case for every single drawing that has this color in it, because in animation obviously you're dealing with multiple drawings. But in Toon Boom Animate and Animate Pro, what you can do is double click on the swatch to bring up the color picker window, and then you can actually change the color and it'll automatically update both in the swatch and the color view as well as in the drawing and camera view. And this applies for every drawing that's been painted with this swatch. They'll all automatically be updated. And that's very convenient because if, say, your art director decides that the main character of an animation should suddenly have a green shirt instead of a red shirt, well, think about how much time that would take you to sit there and repaint that shirt again and again and again in every single frame. So I'm going to undo that. So now let's talk about how to store a gradient or texture swatch that you've applied transformations on. So I don't know if you remember, but a few tutorials ago I showed you how to use the Edit Gradient Texture tool to change the scale, position, rotation, orientation, all those things of a pattern. But then if you decide to use the same swatch and paint another zone, you'll see that the software still scales the texture or gradient according to the zone that it's about to fill. But what if you want to fill it using the same transformations of scale, position, rotation, orientation as it exists in another zone on in the same view? Well, what you can do is store all those transformations for that swatch. So I'll show you what I mean. So let me actually undo that one more time. With the Select tool, select the zone whose position that you like the best, and then in the Tool Properties panel, if you scroll down, click on this button here, which is the Store Color Gradient option. So we'll click on that. Then if we go back to the Paint tool, we just have to enable this button here, which is the Use Stored Color Gradient button, and also have this swatch specifically selected in the color view. And now if we color the same color, you'll see that it's still scaled and rotated the same way as it is everywhere else in the rabbit's robe. Okay, now let's do something really advanced. I'm going to actually go to the rabbit clean layer now and actually deselect the rabbit color. So this is a layer that has the original inked drawings of the front, 3/4, and profile views of the rabbit. And actually I'm going to go to the drawing view for this as well. Same thing. You have to reset the view. And I'm going to change the select tool. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you that you can use these drawing layers, I guess we'd call them, at the bottom to separate your line art and your color art. And this is really great because it makes your inking and your painting really flexible. So you have everything inked right now on your line art layer, but you want to get the zones that are inside the black outlines on a different layer so that you can paint them. Well, you can do this in one quick move by actually selecting the entire drawing and clicking on this button here, which is the Create Color Art from Line Art. So you can do that. So automatically now on the color art layer you have zones that you can paint and fill, and you can see both the line art and the color art at the same time. But let's do this a different way. Let's go back to the line art view and let's actually configure how we want our color art zones to be laid out. So to do this, it even says in the tool tip that you have to press Shift as you click on this to bring up the dialog box, which we're going to do. And so now here's the Configure Line Art to Color Art dialog box. I'm not going to go through all the options. You can actually check with the user guide if you'd like to know more about some of these more particular options, but I'm just going to bring your attention to the source layer and the destination layer. So our source layer right now is a line art layer, and our destination layer is a color art layer. I forgot to mention that if you're using Animate and not Animate Pro, to even see this toolbar at the bottom here, you're going to have to turn on the Advanced Art Mode option in your Preferences panel. And I believe that in Animate you don't have these extra layers, the overlay and underlay art layers, so you're limited in your choices here. So I'm going to keep it the color art layer because right now for me that makes the most sense. You also have these two options that you can check. Clear destination art layer first. If there's anything on the color art layer, it'll clear it, which I want to do because I was sort of fooling around there. And then perform line art to color operation immediately, which we like to do. So as soon as we press the OK button, all this line art will be then transferred onto the color art layer. So let's say OK. And now if we go back to the color art layer, we'll see, yes indeed, these invisible line zones now exist. So if we go to the camera view and we go to the color art layer, so as you see you can go back and forth, and we'll zoom in a little bit here. You can see at times it's not completely accurate the way that these zones are defined, I guess you could say. So once again, you can use the contour editor tool to kind of fix this up a bit. You can use the smooth tool, you can use all the tools that you learned about in previous tutorials to kind of fix this stuff up really quickly if there's a few zones that are out of place. So I'm gonna for example like this, and this line I don't even need at all. And if you've ever used a 3D software program like 3D Studio Max or whatnot, you might have seen this idea of getting rid of vertices. So here we have a lot of these lines that are connected and trying to form triangles, so you can get rid of those pretty easily, and often that's easier than deleting a point, because the problem with deleting points in this situation is that what we're actually looking at are two lines here, and you don't really see that. There's the line that belongs to this shape, and there's the line that belongs to this shape here. And if you start deleting points, often these lines will separate, and then you have this gap, this hole in the middle of your drawing, and you really want these lines to be right on top of each other, so when you paint these two zones, they're right beside each other. So it's often better, I've found, to actually just delete these lines, these sort of lines that are trying to connect 2 points, than to actually delete points. See right here, it just made a funny triangle, so it's better just to delete this here. And then you can go in and delete the points and do what you have to do. You don't have to be that precise, as long as between the black lines it's not a jumble like that. In Animate Pro, as opposed to Animate, you have 2 extra layers in both the camera and the drawing view, and that's the overlay layer and the underlay layer. These extra layers actually exist as they're called, one on top, the overlay, and one underneath, the underlay. So anything you put in the underlay layer will appear underneath the color and the line layer. And of course the line exists on top of the color because you want your black lines to be on top of any rough edges of a color zone. And what people tend to put on the overlay layers are sometimes shapes that you need separately, like glasses or items like that. Sometimes people put their tone and their highlights on the overlay layer as opposed to on the actual color art layer. On the underlay layer, there's a lot of rough sketching that often goes on, notes that are written. So the one thing you have to be careful of, though, when you're using these different modes, is you might get into a position where you start trying to color something or erase or select, and it's not happening, and you're getting frustrated and you don't know why. Well, often it's because you're not on the right layer within your actual layer. So it's something really to look out for. So we'll go back to the color layer here, because I'd like to show you one more way of how to create color art from line art. So to do this, you need to select the brush tool, and you can do this by using the keyboard shortcut Alt or Option and B. And you'll notice in the Tool Properties panel that the 4th icon is the Automatically Create Color Art button. So I'm going to press that. And then actually I'm going to go to the line art layer, and let me pick a dark color, and I'm going to create a shape. And then when I go to the color art layer, you'll see that a zone has automatically been created. So if I go back to the line art layer and I uncheck this option and I create another closed shape and I go to the color art layer, you'll see that there's no blue central vector line contour here that's been created, because this was created, the shape was created when the automatically create color art mode was turned off. So speaking of invisible lines, I'm actually going to delete these. Another, oh, there's no line art layer. Another use for invisible lines is actually to manually close gaps. So I'm pretty sure on this rabbit there are no gaps, but let me create another shape, sort of with a hole in it like that, with the automatically create color art mode enabled. And let's zoom in a little bit here. So as you can see, there's a gap here, and in one of the previous tutorials we learned about the stroke tool, how it's used to create zones for highlights and shadows, as well as to create an invisible line if you want to have a filled color but without any type of a black or thick outline. But you can also use it to close gaps like that. So that's another option in case you need to do something a little bit more precisely and manually. You can also use strokes and invisible lines for that purpose. So the last thing I'd like to show you is how to verify that your character has been fully painted. And to do this, I'll have to quickly color the rabbit. And all this actually needs to be done in the drawing view. So drawing view, I'm on the color layer. Bring up the paint tool and select my skin color and just quickly color the rabbit. So in the drawing view toolbar up here, which you can once again get from Windows, Toolbars, Drawing View, so it's already been checked. The third icon is the backlight icon, and you can also find this option under the View menu, so it's View, Backlight. On Mac it's Shift Command C for the shortcut. You can find this shortcut listed beside the menu item in Windows if you're curious. And when you click on this, what it does is it sort of fakes like a light being shone behind your drawing if it was on a transparent cell, and anywhere where the character has been painted would appear black because it would be opaque, and anywhere where the character has not been painted would become white because the light is shining through a transparent zone. This happens very often. Things like teeth and eyes, and in this case the rabbit's tail is white, have not been painted, and this needs to be corrected because obviously if the character walks in front of a background, all of a sudden where the whites of its eyes were white, you would be able to see the background through. So this is a quick way of checking what parts of your character have been painted or not. So that's it for the tutorial Advanced Painting. Stay tuned for the next tutorial, Palettes.